Hello everyone, another question and answer video today, given that you are busy with the US presidential election and many of you as American followers are in fact neglecting your Schwerpunkt duties, but you are of course dispensed from those for your civic interest. Now, jokes aside, there is this interesting, I think, in fact also American question. I will address mostly the latter part because the other is sort of more personal. Because dear Schwerpunkt, I was just listening, this is on private email, remember there is always that contact. I was just listening to a couple of your videos and I know you have your doctorate. I'm curious to know if you are active in academia. Do you make a living as a professor or teaching in academia? I'm curious about academia, but I hear such dreadful things about it, so I'm not sure whether to pursue an academic career. So regarding the first part, let's say whatever I do, at some point it will be clear to you where I do it, who I am, what I publish, where do I attend, certain activities, etc. The most important part of the question seems to me the latter part, because it's at the end of the day the question, the advice that you are gonna seek rather than knowing something about myself specifically. This is actually a topic I'm sure we discussed somewhere at a point. I mostly discussed the postdoc versus free publications. This topic is somehow very important to the extent, at least, it, of course, I think, betrays this rightful complaint at a point towards at least properly the image that we have of academia that can be interpreted in different ways. So the main deal is that, say, I follow at least a big deal of US conservative political commentaries. There is no doubt that there is something going wrong with universities to an extent, mostly colleges. I've never really even fully understood what's the difference, because I've never been interested in sort of the that educational system across the Atlantic in the technical practical. I mean, I know what the main differences are. My understanding in general is that, of course, like universities are at least the better mean of education that exists out there. But the question can be rather interpreted as a broader, like, is it worth it to study, say, humanities that are specifically the ones that have been more criticized because of this apparent collapse in fact, the very academic standards in many ways. And the general picture is, of course, nuanced, because it does seem like in North America things went a bit astray, especially in the last years. I think that things have slightly, in spite of the anti-Israel protests because of last year's war, etc., but let's say in general, like that kind of ideological craziness that seemed around COVID slightly before to have aggressively or almost virally taken over higher education has slightly resized itself. It's not like we have to be too happy about it, of course, because passing from things like critical race theory to DAI and all this other garbage, frankly, it's would seem apparently irrelevant. The broader point, however, is that I made also in other videos addressing these issues is always the same. We must be extremely clear about the fact that if a culture, if a society experiences such crisis, first of all, this is symptomatic of a problem that, regardless of the objective radicalization of certain academic communities, is spread all across the board, politically, socially, and it in fact points at a comprehensive degeneration of, in this case, educational standards, to be specific. So I am, as I often define myself, also in a provocative way, of course, a beyond far right wing YouTube channel. I mean, though I actually don't talk politics, and I, think to maintain some fundamentally fair and objective historical assessment and capacity. So you don't have to get me wrong at all. I am if I followed my instincts, probably things would get much more messed up than one would think. But we can't use this excuse of I'm conservative, so I must be such an intelligent person with a solid cultural background, or a greater capacity. No, you're part of an incredibly degenerate system. This is true from the entire world, right? Outside of of the West, I don't even pronounce myself, because there are literally still people in the West that have to side for lesser people in order to to feel better about the fact that they are failures in the West. And we have seen, in fact, how accommodated far right and far left are as far as this kind of mental disturbances, so that true right and true tradition have absolutely nothing to do with that. Power is might. Lesser people deserve what they get till the last blow. So this is true both in our society and in the rest of the world. And there is a very heavy, as rigid hierarchy of moral, personal, and cultural superiority and inferiority that people should never forget. So the question is very important, because especially if you're planning to get a higher education, you should understand what you're getting into. So, as I said at the beginning, my personal experience differs wildly from the one that I think is likely to enhance, say, to dramatize by legitimately, all the, can say bad apples, because there is a systemic issue there, but definitely this, the peaks of extremism, of radicalism that the left has, displayed in the last years. I personally think, as a conservative, that wouldn't go anywhere. I mean, it would essentially damage society, would help contribute making it degenerate exactly in the way that I just stated. That is to say, it would actually lower the standards for everybody involved. So with the hope of destroying everybody in the process, rather than having the left winning or whatever. But of course, certain positions, theories, ideologies are untenable, and by traditional standard, they're not supposed to get any kind of power. If they get any kind of power, it's because there is something in the system that allows them to get that, and a great part of that also has to do with conservative ignorance, which is definitely present. I should digress in that regard into, of course, the broader problem, right? Why we have arrived at this point, and saying the differences, the transatlantic differences between conservatives that I think are quite important. In Europe, we had something similar, but Europe is not just, say, the UK or places that are more Americanized by general political culture. This is actually a big issue, especially in the more developed countries in Europe. It has been, and as you know, in the last couple of years, there's been a backlash. In Europe, we got more conservative, in terms of government, and it seems, of course, that the kind of radicalism and extremism at an academic level has not touched Europe in the same way. I also come from a essentially Statal type of culture that actually upholds, so this is against that kind of idea of American conservatism, that more power concentration actually brings to poorer education, actually to the higher educational standards in the world. As I said, when I got my PhD, according to the QS World ranking, my my humanistic faculty was the top one in the world, right? So, and this is not just for some sort of self-complimentary, also because it was not a self thing, it was an external evaluation. But let's say also because there wasn't nothing about this kind of ideologism, right? Ideologism does live in a dimension, in a space on its own, and as such, the eventually, like, the rest of the world continues and profits also from this kind of clashes. So, as you understand already by this premise, I do not believe that for all the things that definitely, all the dreadful things that, as the asker puts it, happen in academia, this should be like a reason not to pursue an academic career. First of all, I don't know here whether the author of the question is interested in, say, I don't know, in history as opposed to engineering. So, of course, there are big differences that are, in fact, the more structural ones remaining. Of course, history does not pay much. It's not much entering the academic career in the sense of becoming a PhD, and so that's actually the divide, right? There was a time, generations ago, in which you could simply there was no doctorate. It was not such a thing like you have to get a PhD as the only way to become a professor. Today there is, and so that's really what the main watershed, like whether you're in or not. So the first thing you have to consider in this equation is not much what will happen to you during this path, but in fact how long it lasts, right? To become a PhD takes at least, from after high school, at least 8 years, which, as far as I hear regarding student loans and debt in North America, of course, it's not a particularly easy endeavor. You have to account, because I know there are people just simply can't afford that, right? If you are interested in Europe, of course, in Europe there are things work differently, right? For example, where I come from, university is accessible, also because in general we pay a lot of taxes, and so education is public, and actually it's a very good education. There are, I think I belong to a few countries in the world in which public education is, for actual merit, much better than the private one. And it's just a system that also, in fact, stems from a certain time in history, and times do change. And so we are aligning ourselves to some, not by will, but by the general crisis of the times, right, of stagnation, to not necessarily the American model, because we uphold this principles of values of rights for educate, for everybody to study, etc. So it's fairly easy, especially now. I don't know. I'm not really telling you to come study in Europe if you're afraid of the American academia. But let's say that there are good opportunities. There are unexpected opportunities that, of course, require a certain life choice, require you to move, etc. So this is entirely on you. So if we instead pick, generally speaking, the overall, let's say the average, neutral, like what could be a general career in the West, broadly meant, then the thing is, yes, you can essentially enter the academic world. The problem is rather becoming a professor and leaving as one, right? Because, at least where I come from, given the weight of these institutions, they are also very expensive by themselves, and there are ever less places as professors. They're literally shrinking en masse because there is no money, essentially no funds, and the general picture may seem meager, right? North America, the Anglosphere, broadly meant, is much more connected to a flexible way of seeing things, like 3 years there, 3 years here, You have this opportunity, you have always to work, you're squeezed, and you do not even necessarily get the finest type of education. This thing of being a PhD was a big one up to a couple of years ago, because there was still that final step, let's say, in the rapid expansion of Western civilization before the stagnation, that fundamentally brought people to still essentially stratify their own roles and competences on the basis of this quite good, at the end of the day, empirical measurement of what kind of title you have. Things seem to have gone astray, mostly during the 10th of the 21st century, and mostly in some specific places. Again, where I studied, I didn't see that. Now I will talk about the actual examples of leftism that I found in my university. That, of course, in a Western European country, at some point, in the 60s, in the 70s, was polluted by Marxism. It has surely maintained a broadly liberal horizon within itself, but that in our cases it never created culture wars, precluded people from different backgrounds to teach. And actually my experience is quite positive in a conventional sense. I still think that, say, throughout all, at least in all the institutions that I attended since school times, things could have been done better tribal time, right? But if I see these international rankings and realize that we're still the best, well, I say, well, okay, but I understand where the good stems from. So the system can't be perfect. The first question, as I was pointing out before, is, first of all, what is that you really want to achieve, right? Because for me, for example, getting a doctorate was not, let's say, a lifetime dream. It was just the consequence of a duty that I had to perform as, becoming the best professional that I could. And that would simply come, I have some a grandparent of mine was a professor, but in medicine, in a completely different field, so also a very different job to begin with. But my parents, for example, did not have an academic. Let's say they aren't doctors. Not my father as an actual medical doctor, but that's another thing. And the reason being, in this sense, simply doing my homework. That's how it happened, right? I don't know how old the author of the question really is. I understand that there are lots of younger people in my audience. So I think that this question is, of course, valuable, precious. So the idea for me was also more tonically, okay, now I have a track. I just have to unlock all the levels and say you arrive to the PhD, and then what, right? Then there is, of course, a path of selection. You basically have to publish as much as you can, of course, maintaining a certain quality, scientific quality of your papers, and on the basis of that, accessing a graduatory that will allow you through these publications points, to enter through a selection in a university as a professor and to teach. That's how it works, right? Many people, because apparently becoming a professor is becoming something ever more, say, that takes ever more time, at least let's put it in this way, and that is also more difficult because of less places. There is many people, especially those who have really to eat through their activity, they need a salary that basically is constituted by the postdoctorates. So these are essentially mini doctorates. Sometimes they can last 1 year, some also for a longer time. They are run also by private institutions, good private institutions for that matter, that are, in this sense, at least where I come from, as sort of byproduct of the same universities. I mean, there are people that through private funds realize that there is this potential to exploit, and they offer I don't know how they live, how much how profitable this activity really is, but essentially people will make a living through that until they become professors in an actual university. The interesting aspect of this is that, at least in my country, is pretty bizarre, right? I know, but we are in this fashion. Like, the points that you accumulate by publishing through private institutions do not count for the public selection, which is pretty weird, because you basically can publish works on different journals, like I do, for example, because you must keep doing that. That's actually a torture. Even when you become a professor, you must keep publishing, otherwise you can't basically keep being a professor. Because being a professor, of course, there is a rank within that. There are different levels of professors within a university, starting from the researcher, etc. But in this sense, everything is becoming ever less resounding in terms of status or authority. You don't even earn that much, and so I presume that there are actually fairly easy ways to make money also as a private researcher if you find the same niche. For example, I don't know, Schwerpunkt is just a sidebar compared to my job, but it is also useful, meaning that I have an income through it. I like doing it. It reinforces my own professional background, because we talk history, and so I learned an incredibly large amount of things through it. And I think that there are so many different. I aren't also working with privates in this, that there is a space that is indeed quite attractive for some sort of more independent activity. And it seems to me, on YouTube, those videos, I don't want to, work a 9-to-5 job, it doesn't make any sense, whatever. Okay, good luck to you. I don't think it's a very intelligent approach. I mean, nobody wants to do that, especially if they have to do it just because they're obliged to have any kind of income. But the simple fact that you don't like it doesn't mean that there is an actual option, right? There may be, you may even find that, you may be liking that, but say if anybody behaved like this, you would still have essentially the world you have now, because, guess what? If there was just a heavenly job for everybody, like, the system would have probably aligned toward that direction. I also don't have any idea how, for example, AI will affect the historical profession. It seems to me that at an academic level, there won't be much that AI can do, at least at this point. The type of papers I write cannot be written by an AI, right? It's for the simple reason that the type of sources I use are not digitalized. So, and I've tried AI, right? Pretty weak one, so not the bigger, say, artificial brains, so-called. But it seems to me that we're getting a pretty strange idea of what AI is supposed to be able to achieve. You can't achieve something that the same humans have achieved. Maybe you have a massive, even a calculator to a degree is more intelligent than you. Like a simple, primary school calculator you use for solving, math problems, to a degree is more intelligent than you. But that tells absolutely nothing regarding the direction that this path can take. So it seems to me that many white-collar jobs, of course, will be obliterated by the AI, and that will also cause some sort of social issues, because it seems to me that people want to be ever more maintained by someone else rather than doing something about it. So it also creates this illusion that you can be the lucky guy living in a comfortable world without actually accomplishing anything. The truth, just also to answer the question, throughout this various digressions is that if you do not follow an academic, first of all, a university and then an academic path, you can't quite produce anything that say today's civilizational development would consider valuable, right? Which doesn't mean that, in fact, you can make such a great living as a historian, especially if you become a professor and you're so squeezed, for example, by bureaucratic activities. The thing is clear, like it's 10% teaching, which you may even dislike to a degree. I, for example, prefer researching by far, but the other 90% of the job is bureaucracy, right? At least where I come from, and I don't think that the rest of the world works that differently. Another thing that you should consider, I made so many different, I don't know whether this question was sparked by my recent videos about the doctoral researches, content, whatever. I can only say that I have in the Historian, question and answer, and PhD tales playlists basically everything that you need in order to understand what, for example, a doctorate is, how you do it, what university is, and how you do it. And so I also talk about this more dreadful aspects of ideologism in universities and so on. My firm point is, however, this doesn't matter how rigged academia is, how many bad things you see, and not even when there is ideologism or leftism. No, right? This has to do with the multiplicity of research types, for example. I remember when I started my doctorate, of course, I got acquainted with all the people of the faculty that were, or at least of our departments of the same floor, let's put it in this way, researchers, and everybody was doing something different. There were different people, different age, different background, different specialty, and not just speaking of different subjects, like I was a medievalist, the others could be an anthropologist, and so on. But literally in the scope, in the objective, in the method, in the kind of approach. So it didn't feel as a scam at all, because actually the researchers at large were very good, it seemed to me. Then I didn't read, honestly, any of these, not even of dear friends of mine that was there the same year, modern history. But I think I realized that there is a bit of a, you think you get there and who knows what you get yourself into, that there is such higher standards. It's all like, I don't know, in movies about the perfect tidy order, everything is precise, everybody's a genius. It's not exactly how it is. And it's even more, I think there is a lot of self-promotion, especially in those worlds in which universities are largely private, right? They care very much their own image. They create their own methods of self-evaluation. So everything seems as if there were such special places. And then actually you look at these people, researchers, how they get in, it's ridiculous. I, for example, come from a place in which I had to get through a public selection with a anonymous essay test that therefore did not allow for any kind of favoritism. I won my place out of 16 contendants for the same. And so I can say that by that conventional degree, I did earn that. But many so-called doctors that you find around, people with PhDs, are people basically whose professors at the end of the master thesis called them and said, "Oh, look, you're smart," or whatever. I will suggest you to the department for a PhD, and they make you do the PhD, and that's it. And some of these PhDs are also, maybe they're good, but there are certain countries that produce so many doctors that as far as I know, also in fact on the job market, are starting to be discriminated, for example, on the basis of country or whatever, because we know that in certain places that education is not good. Like, first of all, consider this: a PhD. This is obvious in a in a country, in a part of the world, is not the equivalent to that one of another, right? If you look at, but mostly like the post-socialist world, I've met many people from there. There is a staunchly lower quality at every level of education. It's say what a PhD thesis is, what for them it's what my master thesis could be. And there is a tendency to make as few as possible. There is also this tendency of through the scholarship, all the expenses covered. If I want to make a vacation in one place with the excuse of attending a conference, I will go there and waste time. I personally studied all the time. I researched all the time. I couldn't care less about any didactic activity. And it seemed to me that that was the better thing. Like the PhD is especially a unique chance in your life to write something truly original. This is something I heard stated. I don't remember actually, but I forgot. But I remember the thing. It was a professor who was saying, I think to bachelor degree students, don't copy the thesis, the bachelor degree thesis, because this is the only chance you have to write something original in your life that is going to remain publicly, even though nobody will ever read it actually, or even know where to find it, of course, for you to copy. And the truth is that bachelor thesis, master thesis even, are practically useless, right? They can be well written, they can be useful. For me, they were. Like, I learned a lot for merely the fact that you're writing one. And, there is so much that you're going to do. I can't think of an AI like allow you to copy. In fact, mostly people tend to copy other people's theses when they want to cheat or something. But on the market, and also in a strictly moral and scientific sense, it's not before the PhD, the doctorate, that you actually learn how to write real history. That's the ultimate step, and then you're qualified. It goes by steps. It doesn't go. It's gradual, but there are these specific boundaries that you must take into consideration. So, my advice when it comes to ideologism is the following: if you really want to become a doctor, and so eventually a professor, because professor equates to the job, you got that job, there is a specific time for which you are. A doctor is then something you are all the time, right? So that being a doctor enables you to become a professor, but you can be or not be a professor during a given moment. And the sense is, if you want to get there, I think it's worth it. I don't deny that. I think, again, if you are self-sufficient, if you accept the costs of this, and that's something that mostly depends on who backs you, where you come from. The question is, yes, go for it, right? How to deal with what you see in between? Don't deal with it, right? I didn't have particular issues with any kind of ideologism. And consider I'm a military historian, so if that is sometimes looked at sinisterly by, in fact, the left, in a sense they think, a polymologist is surely a fascist or a nationalist or whatever, but I didn't encounter any kind of at least direct sabotage. I think I've met people who did not understand what it was, military history and the art of war, and say the research that I was making, but at least from my side, I really dealt mostly with a community of good professors. I didn't have this problem. I found very few ideological teaching. There was just, I remember one class, one exam of essentially it was the culture of immigration culture, kind of. It was about both migration and literature and stuff. It was kind of interesting because it mix colonial stuff with certain communities in of immigrants in the United States. So it was largely historical. It wasn't like a fully fledged, like, I don't know, ideological thing. I found something worse in that sense in when I was studying philosophy, right? It wasn't there. That was a sort of more serious exam, so you can't say that it was political proselytism, but the texts that were written there were more straightforwardly, close to some other sort of political issues than what turned out to be like a history of immigration. So it was even interesting, telling the truth. I knew that the professor was a leftist. She didn't make any excuse for it. It was evident that was surely part, because this was a strange spin-off of a literature class, for a basic literature class that instead had, I don't know, obliged us to follow this other. I don't even know whether it was a legal thing technically. Nevertheless, it wasn't bad. It was nothing. It was annoying to a degree to be there, especially when they made you, take when they got the presents. They made you stay there, but at least they made you pass without too much problem. At least in that class, and so it was just a big class that nobody really. I mean, sure, the word leftists would participate in that, and we're happy, but overall, it was like we had to do it. You do it, and you go. Like, I risked to be expelled a couple of times, if anything, because I responded to professors that were saying BS in a strictly historical sense, because I couldn't tolerate that specifically, and because I'm a quite confrontational person, telling the truth. And but even there, I realized it was not worth it. Like, if the professor had wanted to make a scene and take measures, I would have gotten in real trouble. And so in hindsight, I say, don't do that. Just bite your tongue, go on, make the damn exam. Because at that age, when you're younger, you do have the energy to accept that. You have the energy to say, okay, I will waste time for this, but I will get somewhere. You are motivated, right? Today, I would never do that anymore. I mean, I could even take other degrees, but frankly, why? I could make another doctorate. That would be interesting, but in general, I don't really. I was always terribly annoyed and to be at university in a physical sense, and to listen to. I mostly prepared all my exams at home from the books rather than from teachers. Unless, again, there was this shortcut. If you follow, it's a small class. It's also very technical. One, like, I don't know, paleography or codicology. Okay, but the ones you just have, especially the strictly history one, you have to study a lot of history, a lot of books. Like, that's better done at home. There is no escape, and so yes, that's a choice you have to do on your own. After that, you will find out that, again, it's much worse than it seems in terms of actual job finding. You will do it. I honestly thought before doing the PhD, because I found lots of people complaining about this online, about how difficult it was, how almost useless, how much of an effort. That actually was a good thing. It was a positive thing. It was not so. It was not easy, because it's not meant to be easy. It has to prepare you for that broader research capacity, which is the ultimate reason why you get it. Without the doctorate, you can't make it, right? Unless you have a doctorate from another discipline, and in parallel you are a true but a very cultured connoisseur of history, you can't sort of approach the thing. But otherwise, let's be honest, like, there isn't such, as I was saying at the beginning, idea that somehow spread in certain conservative circles that humanities are worthless, and even more so because there are leftists in the universities. In that's not true. Like in order to be a successful person, you have to be a highly educated person, right? The rest is statistically irrelevant. You can make a lot of money with a specific job if you're good at it. You can grow accustomed to a particular mansion. There are so many different types of jobs where this can happen. But let's be honest, if you want the fame, the glory, let's say of a real recognition in a way that our civilization in a way or another has affirmed as the way to go, well, again, academia is the only way. All right, it's at least the most straightforward one. There is no doubt this. Much of this also depends on how driven, motivated you are. For example, I am a person that always worked a lot for things that was interested in. As I said before, I did my doctorate just because it was a mean to an end. It was not an end in itself. It was something, if anything, actually an hindrance along the way. Like, I had to do this, okay, I do it. That's how sort of beyond the obstacle I am all the time. And so, more than else, there are things that I like doing and that I like I like learning. And I think that's very important for history because it never ends even just to what university gave you. This is also another great discriminant between the two things. Like, don't think that you actually come out of university infused with higher knowledge. That's what I thought myself before getting to university. University does not do that. University does give you a backbone, a skeleton, a structure. It basically tells you, look, we gave you the method, we gave you the formal idea of how things work, and how history is supposed to be made. We made you write, we made you study, we made you, learn things at large, and we tested essentially your commitment to the subject. But truly, and this nobody really imposes you, but you have to do it by yourself. Nobody provides you with an actual culture. Nobody makes you study the entirety of history. Say, you think that you go to university and you study medieval history and you get your PhD, or even less, of course, with master thesis, and you actually know all medieval history well? No, that's absolutely not true. And what you see on this channel, by the way, is something extremely rare of someone, again, that went through the path but decided in parallel to study all this other stuff in order to complete that gap, to fill that gap that in fact was the reason that I wanted to learn history for. Like, I say it very clearly. Like, my colleagues at large can be extremely cultured in many ways. They can be extremely competent in their own field of research. That's what, again, we got to that point for. But in terms of general historical knowledge, like one that you could consider academic in nature for, say, most of the rest of the Middle Ages, like, there is no such thing. They don't have an idea, really. So it can be, it is frustrating to a degree. It is disappointing to a degree. I always put myself at the center of the thing. I always thought from my side of the story. As I was saying, I'd never liked staying at university. I didn't care about it. It was just a mean to an end. So if you don't have that kind of drive, if you're not especially motivated to simply rise through the ranks, just out of your work, it's a bit difficult to take that path. What I would say is that when you become a professor, first of all, you must be, this is what I've seen personally, is that you must be constantly active as far as these other initiatives are concerned. Like, you mostly have to be into publishing. I mean, people publish, and publish, but because of what I just said, of course, the general outcome is often very disappointing, meaning that, of course, there is an inflation of articles, and also such a rush for publishing as much as possible that many scholars say, okay, I will just write whatever, and I will not mind it to be particularly insightful or whatever, and so I will just go by quantity over quality. I also took another path, which is yet very heretical considering this convention. I take, I think, a fair amount of time. I think taking 3 months to write an article is just finish it in record time. Of course, it depends what kind of topic it is. Some topics you have to really start from zero, which is not advisable, especially when you have a doctoral thesis that should have provided you with abundant material, which was especially the case with my thesis. It was enormous. It was like 700 pages long. And especially containing so much of different aspects that were well amalgamated, don't get me wrong, but that could open to so much further research. In fact, I know that I will keep publishing stuff from all this, more or less the same topic for the rest of my life, unless I, in parallel, also thanks to Schwerpunkt, as it happened, by the way, I don't get in something, some other topic more thoroughly. That's also a matter of income. Again, I, for example, refused postdocs because at the end of the day they're a bit the same thing. Yes, they do pay you, but you may have another income in the meanwhile if you're lucky, and you can dedicate yourself more to your research. What the postdocs make you do mostly is also teaching, attending events, conferences of that institution that you don't care about. You're essentially forced, right? So my tutor, for example, who's a Hell professor who followed me throughout all my paths, told me, look, in your case, don't go to a postdoc, because unless you have like a professor that studies exactly what you do, and so you have a great interest and purpose in following him or her, it's better for you to publish independently. And so again, money and say more menial interests and research just per se, and so also the quality of what you write and the person you can be, are two very different things. And I also always opted for the glory of it, because publishing too much is not good, I think, for the reputation of this or that professor. For example, in my country, there is one specific professor who I think is a very good one. He's a very good historian. He's a medievalist. He studies more or less the same period. I mean, he studies, now it's not so important, but say we are very close in interests, except he's not a military historian strictly meant. He just touched on certain topics more from a political, institutional, administrative point of view, because he's a bit weighted to work with archives, with scholarly legacies, etc. I'm instead a guy who wants to simply reconstruct how an army worked on the field, serially. And there is so much virgin soil still in that, and nobody else is doing it. And I'm writing pretty good stuff, and people are starting to know me for that specifically. They're starting to appreciate the fact that this is not just a work written just for doing so. For example, that professor, that's why I brought him up, writes so many books, right? And you think, oh my God, it's a book. It's much better than an article. Who knows what it's written on it? That's exactly what I wanna follow. Instead, no, they are sort of very cheap. Say not cheaply researched, but let's say they're, because if you read this guy's articles, they're very good, and surely they bring a lot of credit to him. But the books are just some compendia, right? They are a general assessment from the expert that says, look, if you want to know this topic, just study it from this other secondary sources that I'm giving you in the bibliography kind of attitude. Sometimes there are more thoroughly researched books, but they also take much more time. I instead focus only on that. I focus only on the higher quality and how useful it is to my purpose. Also to make people understand things. It's a bit what I do on Schwerpunkt, right? You see, what I do here is, of course, not how I would work like with how I work with the academic stuff, but it is disproportionately qualitative compared to the rest of the content you can find. People don't understand it because they say, why do you spend all this time? Why do you make these videos that are sort of long and boring, nobody listens to? Because I know that what's in them is what you lack in here. So if you're not able to recognize it, it's okay. But for whoever has the interest of seeing something more complex and having some extra original say historical criticism from someone that has the experience, just know that you can't really find this type of content somewhere else, right? You will not simply take a book and say, okay, this is how Schwerpunkt will explain it, or this is all what I need to know, that it's written in here and that I can't find instead than Schwerpunkt, right? That's why I like the criticism. I like the fact that all this content is one with itself. It's not just, okay, let's market the next video in a way that more people will click on it. I don't care about that, right? Because I know that the content itself is better, and that the reason why people don't watch it at large, aside from entertainment reasons, is that in fact there is no historical commitment. So this actually happens at so many different levels in the in history too. Like, you have a lot of people writing books, publishing whatever, sponsoring themselves, friends of friends, whatever, but say creating this weird idea of the academia out there, but not telling you the truth, right? I tell you what's behind the scenes. I'm telling you, look, in order to look at to find quality in a scientific work, you have to search specifically for this or that, or I tell you where to search and what kind of process brought that work to be created. The average audience doesn't have any idea of that. They are going to buy everything, right? And they will especially start creating a subcultural mythology for which, oh my god, that professor is just the best just because he's a guy who talks, I don't know, about knights and battles. Are there, right? So many that actually understand that, who actually study campaigns and battles, reconstructing them with all sources available, and that do only that in their lives, and not people that just make some sort of marketing initiative with images for children fundamentally, because that's the level of attention, and then can't even harness military logic when they, because it's not to be given for granted, they try to make a tactical strategical analysis. Believe me, this does affect you when you undertake the academic career, right? It's not easy to realize how rigged the general cultural space is. The reason why I say this is that there is this idea, again, that the greater problem that we have is leftism out there. The greater problem is not the fact that there is leftism per se. The greater problem is that the rest of the people are essentially at the same subcultural level, and they don't even recognize that. And so we're not really facing an existential threat in the way we would conventionally address it. We're just facing a gradual degeneration that will probably bring to some existential threat at a point, but that in this point of civilization is rather like having all the means at our disposal and fixating with things that have nothing to do with any constructive attitude, and pretending that we are smart because of sort of we understand that this is the big deal and the problem, but we don't even know how to solve it. Right? The only way to solve it is actually to pursue that academic career, working hard your entire life, and being able to sacrifice yourself. Right? The problem is not being scared away, trying to find. You see, believe me, I'm very sympathetic towards that feeling, because it's a chthonic feeling. Everybody knows what it is. This question, for example, seems to come from that. Like, of course, there is a need for certainty. There is a need for, say, what will I do in the future? You can't fully know that. But indeed, civilization does provide you with that indicator of how to do it. And there are no shortcuts, right? The notion here, at least the question, does sound a bit defeatistic in the sense that, oh my God, I would love, I don't know, do you know how it is? Because I've heard so many bad things in academia, so I will not, I don't know, start it unless somebody tells me to do so for the most positive reason. I know that we would all like to land in that safe place, in that safe haven. Some of us are actually lucky to be able to already be there. I would say that, telling you the truth, what allows you to pursue this career or not, in quite practical terms, is whether you're already, if you have a passive income already, if you come from an affluent background. That is very important, right? Having, I don't know, assets of, couple of millions euros as a whole, like in Western Europe, is a solid, start for this kind of activity, like a purely professional specialization in whichever historical topic you wanna pursue. If you are really starting from zero, it's another story. And probably at that point, I would tell you, do not pursue this. Or at least do it, of course, always if you think it's the right thing for you. But you will also not know how it really is. And honestly, I've always wondered in my life how my life would have been if I had had a different job. Right? If I had chosen to be... Probably would have not been happy, because I find out that this is really what I love doing, and that gives me a lot of satisfaction. But especially if I lived in the United States, for example, I would want to try out a more conventional job or some sort of more conventional business or whatever. I don't know what I could do, or whether I'm potentially inclined towards a specific profession or another, but I suspect that regardless of how the system could actually beat it, there may be a greater satisfaction in pursuing, I don't know, becoming a doctor, for example. Okay, let's not exceed, because, for example, where I come from, being a doctor is a hellish experience today. Right, before doctors were revered, you were really someone. The same goes for PhDs, right? Before, everyone thought greatly of PhDs. Now, you wonder why also this is not the case anymore, because objectively also the quality of the thing collapsed, right? If you go to a hospital and you realize that doctors do not have that good old sort of solid practical, so physical experience, they just think about technology and keeping patients away as if they were, just objects, you realize that something is broken. And the same goes with history. When you realize that people wear masks, they are basically cosplaying what would be an intellectual, at least in their case, pseudo-intellectual, and pretend that they're such deep thinkers with such great cultural level and whatever. And yeah, I know from the outer side, and also actually from within the same system, that brings a lot of discredit to the academic population. Let's put it in this way. But this is in fact the trick. At least this is a life philosophy of my life choice of mine. Do not take. It'll be very straightforward to me. The most important thing is the family. I believe that settling down, having kids, that's the single most important thing. Like, find the woman you love, remain with her for all your life. That's the single. If you are, of course, well established already, like, that's the single most important thing. In relation to that, even a professional academic career is to be pursued, as I do, but it's secondary, right? You shouldn't be so obsessed about it. If that is instead a mean to an end, because that will higher your status, your prestige, it is possible that, in fact, the next generations will not be overwhelmingly appreciated for the actual moral and scientific quality of their work. And my impression especially is that after the whoever is born after the early 90s will have an extremely tough time at getting any kind of sort of solid education that can compare with the one we had instead. You know, we were born in a time in which really, we were brought up by both using paper and pencil and a computer. There will be nobody let's say, in terms at least of those who had this when they were growing up, now that have the same, right? As nobody before was brought up with a computer. So we are apparently the generation that peaked together with Western civilization at that time, and they had all the best, potential, etc. Like, there were lots of problems already beneath the ashes, let's say, but we are also the ones that probably will be more, relied upon when the system will start cracking, if it does. If it starts doing it, probably already has. Look, it's so big that we aren't even properly realizing what is going on, but it does pass through, in fact, the moral and scientific quality that you were supposed to get through an academic career. Because that's the thing, like, it's not the career, it's what you're basically trained to do as an academic. It's a completely different concept. In fact, I often talk this in my videos, like this idea of being, for example, a scholar. The Anglosphere attributes a much greater deal of importance to the scholarship rather than to the sources, to history as a whole. In continental Europe, our idea is there is history, there are great historians, yes, but at the end of the day, being an academic is a profession. It's something you do in a almost private sense, right? You are that as opposed to be an engineer or a doctor, right? That's what matters. We're a bit more, traditional, and that's a bit more provincial to some extent. We're all provincial in many ways, it is true. But even I say it, even if I come from actually the capital of my country, but we're provincial in the sense that we do. I mean, as Europeans, we are aware of differences. We do understand our background, but we also like to point out different things. It seems to me instead that in the Anglosphere, the main sense of being a scholar is, oh my God, this person is a scholar. Oh my God, that's such a refined mind, a sophisticated, genius of something. No, right? There's none of that. There is this sort of awe, or at least hyper hype towards having an academic background is ridiculous in many ways. Not just because I think that something went deeply wrong. In fact, in academia from 50 years, especially in the Anglosphere, and especially in humanities, but because it's not what it should be about, right? I don't know. At least I would say in the Anglosphere there is also a much more interesting approach to that. I see lots of people that have conventionally no, say, specific say academic training that get a degree or something, and then for a passion that maybe they had, begin to publish articles. They do it in this sense. This is actually a very good thing. I think within the Anglosphere, and the sense in that case, however, is seemingly wanted to participate to this broader debate that we should hear the expert for, rather than focusing more on the general history of why we are there. There's too much talking. There's too much relativization of what this or that person contributes for, as opposed to the actual content, the actual matter of it all. Right? These are subtle differences. I don't deny it. These problems are present on both sides of the Atlantic at different levels. But I think that at least this may also easily be my more withdrawn character in many ways. I like tranquility. I like being quiet, having everything under control, not having to exhaust myself more than much. Thus, I normally work in a way that does not make me so involved in the strictly careeristic or that kind of a anxious mode for which I have always to produce the umpteenth paper for saying that I have a publication. Right. In the Anglosphere, it's instead repeatedly like this. Even the PhDs are very much focused on this. I mean, our PhD was something like, okay, we give you 3 years to write a thesis. We will routinely check what we're doing. You will have at least to be here sometimes, but then you're on your own. Good luck. Make us proud. Give us the best. That's it. As far as I've seen, doctorates elsewhere are more than else like, again, not much of a selection. This is also true and present in some cases, a lot of the exploitation of the researchers for specific professors' ends. But mostly, you have 3 years of PhD, you will have to, publish 12 articles in the meanwhile. What? I still have to be a doctor. I still have to, I will have to write a major doctoral thesis, and I have to write 12 articles in between. How do you think I'm even able to write that? How do you think I even have the time to understand what I'm researching if I'm pressured to do something like that? And the outcome, in fact, is actually disastrous, because we do not see that academic culture produce anything better. We see something much more improvised, much more rushed, much more on the run, much more hypocritical, much more sort of trying to mask the actual quality of the situation, much more self-sponsored, and without, in fact, a proper also political end. Every university in the private domain being wildly, self-referential, and also producing a sort of, I would say, general ignorance, in fact, about the outer world. Right? What kind of institutions, for example, are better for becoming it really depends on what you want to do. My answer would be, yes, you should find a good place. I mean, it may even be advantageous to find a place that asks you for less if you have to get just the title. But the point is, indeed, what you should be after is not the title, in the sense, at least, of a piece of paper you can wave, right, to get a job or whatever. Rather, what the title means. I mean, how much did you actually work behind that for it? That's the single most important thing that you have to ask yourself. If you're not ready to accept that in order to become successful, you have to work hard and you have to start properly reasoning in terms of, I need to study a single topic for years every day, sacrificing also my personal life or whatever to ultimately have a degree of competence, you can't go very far, because it's not even a guarantee of success to behave like this, you can imagine if you just, waste time along the way. And then, of course, this is true. I mean, things tend to adjust themselves if you remain within the environment, if you are essentially tied to this mechanism, and you really need to work, and you really need, you will be pressured enough to find essentially what you need, right? There are people who found a lot of people actually that, for example, took a PhD out just excuse me, I was distracted by here I have the the various YouTube suggestions, and there is Redeemed Zoomer who says, why I'm quitting Protestant apologetics, why I won't defend Protestantism anymore. So this was a channel, by the way, that was all about Protestantism, as far as I understood. Never watched a single video of it, but it was just like mostly those, what are the differences between these confessions, and then like 5 minutes explanation, and then, now I'm not a Protestant anymore. Maybe, things are working out correctly. But what I was saying in general is that you see these people that are effectively just wanting to make a doctorate because they are in between something. The people who are not even using it for any reason say, I want to get a doctorate, I want to do this, right? In part because there is a scholarship attached. So there are some jobs, for example, that allow you to remain in the system while you do the PhD, and you earn money, you have fun, you deepen this thing, and this knowledge, and it can turn out to be useful for you in other fields even. But then don't do anything with that. I know people who started their doctorate and didn't finish it out of different actual faults, right? Because they were not particularly good, admittedly, but it's rare as well. I know people who they're also like pretty old, frankly. Like I did my doctorate, I was beating myself over the fact that overall I lost 2 years because I studied one of economics, and then I bailed out, and then I lost another year to write my bachelor thesis, which was ridiculous. Just for a couple of months I did that, to take enough time, and took a bit of a sabbatic half year. But the actual story, I was young when I did this, and so I was okay. I was, and still am, in fact, in the full prime of that researching phase of my existence, and I'm happy about that. And so I realized that if I go on just by following the timing, things will smile, like hopefully on me, at least from a professional point of view. That you may never know what happens in life, unfortunately, but this is also a way to find out, right? If you have a purpose, if you have a greater, I would say this is important. Albeit when you have this title, you start growing disillusioned. You think that things are not so easy as you thought they could be, etc. At the end of the day, you don't realize how much of this track is actually still under your feet, and how much it goes on, and how much at that point it's not in fact much about the fact that you are dissatisfied with the reality. It's that you're habituated to the fact you have already arrived there. You forgot how hungry you were before, of whatever the reason you did this for, and now you just grew intolerant to anxiety, or to this need to perform or whatever. However, you also grow. I would say that a very good thing about this job is that you unavoidably improve over time. I mean, this is true for most jobs, of course, but let's say it's a type of job that does not require also much physical capacity, so you can actually concentrate that for your own pleasure to a degree. If you were a sportsman, if you also had to be really there, like making life-saving jobs, right? Things would be different. They're much more deteriorating. And in general, in fact, these jobs help you also afterwards. So I wouldn't say it's actually such a great choice, especially if you are searching for having a lot of money quickly. That's definitely not the case. However, over time, things do change. Like, aside from being a professor, that can be frustrating for all the reasons. I don't know any job that is not frustrating. There is no such a thing. Like, you have done so much just to arrive to a point that you say, oh my God, what am I doing? I didn't think it was like that. But say, at least in the United States, as far as I know, school teachers even have more millionaires among them than lawyers. And that's an interesting perspective on how and what you can hope to achieve. For example, I don't know, today, what it was, my mother went to like a doctor for like the annual some general background check, and this guy basically is so lucky because he's like these generic doctors that you have in the quarter, This guy had the luck of inheriting his studium from his father. He doesn't like that because he's a generic doctor in that way. He wanted to do plastic surgery. And he's just there. He earns his share of money. He doesn't really have, aside of course being a doctor is a responsibility, but he just sits there, doesn't do too much. He earns, and that's it. He can go home to his wife. Isn't that a nice life? The purpose of finding that kind of life without, say, finding a compromise between the stress and what you can gain out of it. And that's all about that, right? And so I can't tell you that the academic career per se is this particularly advantageous thing. Many people say, don't do it, because there is this joke that there is no job or whatever. But there is, I think, no general problem with it. I think it's actually a very nice, I think what attracted me in part to this is that it's you writing, it's you explaining, it's you researching, it's you providing something to people that can be useful for someone, that doesn't pressure you in this intolerable way. Maybe so many people at some point will read, but that for now provides you just with that calmness. You don't have really to confront any major crisis. You don't have to handle anything that makes you, let's say, it's a long-term, let's say, investment. Let's put it like this. And so you will get less in interest of time, but you will sediment enough for the end to be rewarding, for something to be, and it will just open to you if you are especially versed in disclosure, if you are up to this kind of general participation to be known, to be read. You may become a consultant. It's all something that can easily gratify you. It can make you attract lots of different interest. And for me, at least, it's been the case. And I think life has been quite gentle with me in general. And so I speak from a privileged standpoint, which I absolutely am proud of, because it's also my family's accomplishment. It's the way I was brought up, and the way it was that allowed me to acquire the skills that I have today. So I'm perfectly fine, right? if the situation instead is more like, okay, I like history very much, but I have no clue really how it works and how life or any other job really works, it could be different. At that point, it's not me who can tell you what can be right. You have to find out by yourself. But in that sense, forget to be immediately successful, because that's not how it works. Then, are there people who immediately enter like the academic career? If you like teaching a lot, if you are like to be with people out there, you're a very social person, probably it's a very good type of job for you. That is true. But otherwise, just be aware that this is a job like another to an extent, and that probably it's, I think, something that will preserve itself at an academic level. I don't think there are going to be many upheavals, right, in terms of like AI, as we were saying before. I think we will always need experts in this field. And the fact probably that the system is shrinking, that it means also that less people are going to get into that business. So given that this shrinking somehow accelerating, and or like, we're all into this new situation which we're ever more dependent on states, on the general system, etc. Like if you were into the business before, if you worked if you worked very well to remain into it from before, after all, there are even more chances to find for you to find a good place and to be one of the last few good historians, perhaps for a very long time in history. And this is more or less what I go by, so that's essentially it. Then, as I was saying before, I have a couple of playlists dealing in detail with the doctoral research, the general issue, how to do this all, like the pros, the cons, what it means to go through it. Again, it's a more relaxed type of job compared to pretty tough others, so it's less economically rewarding, but just tendentially. Doesn't mean like it can be extremely pressuring at times, it can be very economically rewarding. It just depends on the circumstance, right? And I know it's pretty generic, but in a sense I have to provide you with say not just a generic answer to a generic question, but with something that can be valid for anybody else. Like I make this this kind of videos exactly for the same reason. Now for today, however, I stop it here. Naturally, we will keep talking about this. I receive lots of questions. They give me some oxygen, between a video and another, because it does require some time to prepare them. But we're always open to this kind of conversation. For today, I stop it here. Just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. As always, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.